In essence, it actually says that you are not the reason why why customers buy your product. They essentially just need to get something done, and they're hiring your product to get the job done. And either they hire or they fire it if they don't get the job done properly.
Welcome to This is Product Marketing, brought to you by Product Marketing Hive, a product marketing community that gives back. In this episode, Georgia Diaconescu, Product Marketing Manager at What3Words, and Crispin Reed explore the jobs to be done in product marketing. Let's dive into it right now.
Welcome to today's PMM Hive Talk with Georgia Diaconescu. Let's get started. Georgia, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Excited to be speaking with you today.
So, the topic today is jobs to be done, and it's a fascinating topic. And Georgia has applied jobs to be done in at least a couple of different ways. So perhaps Georgia, you could start just by introducing yourself.
Yeah. Hi guys. So I'm Georgia. I am leading product marketing at What3Words. Have had the opportunity, as Crispin said, to apply jobs to be done in quite a few companies. Had the opportunity to work in fintech, as well as an innovation hub within a large FMCG and in augmented reality industry. So a bit of a mix of startups and larger companies. So yeah, excited to be here today, and hopefully we have a chat that's helpful for you.
Great. So perhaps we can start with what is jobs to be done. Yep. It's a topic that's been popularized by Clayton Christensen and many others, but maybe we can just start with the quick overview. What is jobs to be done? Yeah,
jobs to be done is interesting. It's a methodology / framework to essentially uncover unmet customer needs, so to speak. So in this, it actually says that you are not the reason why why customers buy your product. They essentially just need to get something done, and they're hiring your product to get the job done. And either they hire or they fire it if they don't get the job done properly. And the very famous example of that is obviously with a 1/4 inch hole. Like, people need 1/4 inch hole. They don't need a 1/4 inch drill. They just need to get the job done, right? Drill is just one way of obtaining the result. So really our responsibility as product marketing practitioners is to convince them that our solution is the best one to get the job done. So yeah, that's the essence of it.
So jobs to be done has been and is applied a lot in innovation. The question that we might not get to the bottom of today, but which I'm starting to probe, is what is the right role for jobs to be done in marketing, in B2B marketing? And one of the things that struck my attention in another talk that you gave was you were talking about how sometimes jobs to be done is a much better fit as you think about product than personas. Sometimes what people want a product to do just doesn't have anything to do with who they are at a persona level. It's whether if it's a consumer persona, which is to do with demographics, or it's a business persona about job role, that just isn't related to the use of the product. So can you talk a bit about the limitations of personas that you've come across, and how jobs to be done offers an alternative view?
Absolutely. I think one way I would position jobs to be done is maybe as a complementary approach to personas. I think personas have their use, and they definitely help teams kind of empathize with who they're dealing with and who they're addressing. You know, from my point of view, personas offer a snapshot in time of someone. What's a potential person that we might be speaking to? And in a B2B context, what's the user like? What's the buyer of the solution looking like? And I think jobs to be done from that perspective, what it actually has to offer is the fact that, it helps teams kind of come together around the process of how someone makes a decision. And sometimes, like you said, it doesn't really have anything to do with the fact that they're Sylvie, 40 years old, e-commerce manager. It's simply, I just need to get to a destination on time. Or a student who is at King's College, because we were talking earlier, you were at King's College, needs to get to his classes on time. I'm probably going to use the same product as Sylvie, right? Google Maps, just as an example, right? So yes, I think from that point of view, it does force teams and both product marketers and product managers and everyone kind of take a step back and look at essentially what are we here to do? What are we actually bringing to the table? So yeah, I think it offers a dynamic view, a complex view of the journey the specifics of getting that job done.
And I noticed in Clay Christensen's book, the one that really writes, the whole book is about jobs to be done, something about competing against luck.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's all about jobs to be done. And one of the things he says in that book is, I live in the suburbs, I have this demographic and so on and so forth. But for me, that would never be a reason why I would read the New York Times. He distinguishes between correlation and causation,
right?
Because the book, as most of his books, is about innovation, right? So it's like, if you're a marketer, sometimes you can get away with correlation.
Yeah.
It's like, generally speaking, people with this profile tend to buy these types of products.
Right.
And as a marketer, sometimes you don't care to look deeper. It's just like, well, okay, if that's true, then we can probably use that as marketing. We don't really care, what the reason is behind it. And he makes the point that none of these things would ever be the reason why. I read it because, for example, an example he gave is if I have to go to the dentist and I want something to read while I'm waiting and I don't like the magazines lying around in the dentist, then I might take a copy of the New York Times to read. It has a job. It has a very specific job for me, which is to spend some time reading something that's not too bad for a brief moment in a situation, in a circumstance that is very specific. And then he goes on to talk about how if you're involved in innovation, then causation is absolutely fundamental. You have to, if you're going to innovate and create something new, make a new product, solve a new problem, you have to understand why.
Makes perfect sense.
Why people are doing it, which is really missing from personas. It's more correlation than causation.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so one of the other things which is really interesting, I think, in jobs to be done is that there are functional jobs which are sort of what most of us would probably think about as being sort of jobs, the purpose. And then there's also emotional and social jobs, which are also an important part of jobs to be done, which I see, at least in B2B personas, as being missing. I haven't seen anything about that in those. Can you talk a bit about the emotional and social jobs in jobs to be done, and what's the point of those, and how are they important?
Yeah, I think they're incredibly important. Like you said, we over focus on the functional side of things, like what exactly is the solution doing for my user, for the buyer of this solution, right? The emotional job, and specifically how people want to feel as a result of executing that functional job. So, for example, the one that you just mentioned about the New York Times, I know it's not exactly B2B. I have a B2B example for you, but specifically to that one is to avoid boredom while I'm waiting for the dentist, or maybe just to distract myself because I'm really nervous to go in. So that will be an emotional job. The social job is how people want to be perceived by others by doing that or getting that job done. In your case, maybe it's just to look really, really well informed, or if you're reading the New Yorker, maybe you want to show belonging to a certain group of people. But that's kind of how these two are different. And the reason why these play an interesting role is that once you sell in or propose a solution to another business, you are then able to, per profile, understand what emotional job and social job this would do for the user or for the buyer. And it's really interesting to see kind of how those two things play out, right? Because if you are proposing a solution to a buyer who, maybe they're the director of a group and they have the say of whether a certain solution is adopted or not. The emotional job might be giving them a sense of control over what happens. The social job might be, here I am using the latest technology and whatever, therefore I'm seen as someone forward thinking in my group of directors, for example. So those are things that kind of, that once you get to understand the nuances of that, even in a pitch, even equipping a salesperson with that level of information or that kind of messaging can have a massive impact. So yeah. I think they're definitely two pieces of the puzzle that we haven't really we're still getting to nailing down.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think certainly in B2B tech, I mean, it's not that people never think about emotions or social stuff at all. I mean, obviously that's a big part of, for example, customer programs, in general, PR programs, awards programs, speakers bureaus, all of those things. But what's interesting with jobs to be done is that it sort of formalizes this at a much more precise and detailed level, and people actually have the job of going to think about it. Whereas it's like, well, obviously people want to participate in PR stuff because it makes them famous, and that's all that's all sort of good. But it's a much more formal way of looking at it.
Absolutely. And they
So
change over the whole journey as well. So that's something quite interesting to in the whole buying process. Let's put it in the buying process. They change as well. The emotional job maybe goes from feeling reassured to feeling, I don't know, in control, or they actually change. So they're quite dynamic, and I feel adding that level of what happens at each stage of that process can make a big difference in how we meet those needs as well. From messaging point of
that's
view.
interesting. Yeah, that's clever. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about how you've applied jobs to be done. What has your experience been? What have you used it for? And
Oh gosh, I've seen it in an interesting setting. So as a context, I was working in a company that was essentially an innovation hub within a large beauty company. And we entered a bid to create a digital solution on behalf of one of the large brands. The essence or the end goal of that was to create a product that helps boost the e-commerce sales and help customers choose the right product for them. And we decided early on that if we approach it like everybody else, every other consultancy coming into the game, then we're not going to do well. And it just so happened that our chief product officer was very familiar, was actually Jobs to be Done practitioner, and had seen it in action and at IBM, I think, and other companies. So what he did is we brought in a consultancy that led us in a really, really insightful journey to actually apply Jobs to be Done, and spent quite a bit of time doing that. In the whole process, we came to the conclusion that the business we're trying to help has one job to serve its own customers, which is really interesting. So the way we positioned that was, here's how we're helping you serve your customers and that B2B space. So it was less about what job we're getting done for the company. It's more about, here's how we're helping you get the job done for your customers. So yeah, we obviously did quite a bit of customer journey mapping. We mapped out, did the job mapping. So putting all the 6 stages: define, prepare, execute, monitor, modify, and conclude. You guys can read later about this, but we went through all the steps of creating the job steps, creating the sub steps of that, ran 3,600 interviews or something like that in 4 different markets, which was incredible, and obviously costly. It needed quite a bit of resource, and asked all of these people to give each of these steps an important score and a satisfaction score. And then from that, we understood where in that whole decision-making process, what's the opportunity, where could we excel, where is the pain point, what's missing and what's hurting. So from that, we took all of those insights. We designed a tool that essentially married both AR, artificial intelligence, and facial recognition. It was like a whole mix, and it was really interesting. It was really cool. We won a Webby Award with it this year in the apps, mobile, and voice section. So yeah, it was really interesting to see that play out and come to life in the product. Yeah, quite an extensive process, I must say. Quite a few months. Yeah.
So what do you think you were able to uncover? Sounds like there was a huge amount of research. Yeah. What do you think you were able to uncover with that research using the Jobs to be Done methodology that might have been harder to get to if you were thinking about things in a different way?
Yeah, because it was a beauty brand, we were essentially talking about helping people choose a beauty product. We realized that people don't need beauty products. They just want to look the way they want. And the way people get that job done can be very different, right? It could be maybe buying a dress. It could be buying, something completely different. Maybe it's, changing something else about their appearance, whatever it is. And all of a sudden it kind of shifts your way of thinking in terms of what's my market. Because all of a sudden you're not competing against other beauty brands. You're competing against very different players And that allows you to tailor that messaging and make it really effective. And so that was really interesting. I think instead of presenting something that the company wanted to be presented with, the business, the brand that we were designing this for, we positioned it as, we're creating something that your customer wants, and here's how it serves you. And I think that was kind of the aha moment where they were kind of like, okay, we understand. You've been listening to the people we're trying to serve. We're on board. So yeah, I think that was the highlight of the whole thing, because it went from serving products to getting in the mind of getting into the decision making process of that actual person. Yeah.
Yeah, because it changes the way we think about competition, right?
Absolutely.
Because which is really interesting. Because, if you look at a product competition, you think about, okay, here's my product in this category. What are the competing products in similar categories? But if you think about it in terms of a job someone is doing, then the competition is often completely nothing to do with the product that you have. It's
absolutely. It could be from a different category. So now all of a sudden you think of satisfying that need in different ways. So yeah. I think it's a really interesting approach. And maybe we couldn't have gotten that from personas. I think that would have not been necessarily the immediate result of working with personas, which is why I mentioned earlier, it's great to complement them and to look at it from multiple angles. Yeah.
Yeah, because the competition for someone sitting in the dentist who's reading the New York Times to pass the time, might instead be playing a video game on their phone.
That's right. Fortnite on your mobile.
Fortnite on your mobile.
There we go. Or Instagram,
but not on your Apple mobile at the moment.
Not on your Apple mobile.
That's really interesting. And so something else that you suggested there, and this all ends up relating to innovation, is sort of segments. Customer segments that end up being sort of job derived customer segments rather than product oriented customer segments. So innovation certainly that works really well with jobs to be done. And when I was first reading about the jobs to be done material, it really reminded me of some work that I'd seen from about 20 years ago when I was working in Paris. There was a gentleman by the name of Michael Thompson there who's a professor, I've noticed since then, which somehow doesn't entirely surprise me, because he was very sort of ahead of his time, I think, in how he was thinking about things like user experience and stuff in the 90s.
Right.
And he applied a method called contextual design, which is still used today, but it's based on, at least it's a sort of user experience oriented method, but it's really based on, and the commonality with jobs to be done is it's really based on observation a lot. So the idea was, you can ask customers questions and they'll tell you whatever they tell you, but when you actually watch them working, when you observe them, you discover things that they would never tell you. In particular, one of the, and this was in a context of B2B tech. So he went off and did an observational study for several weeks with a very small number of customers. So it's very much heavier than running a customer advisory board. You got 15 customers, takes you a day. This is more like 2 weeks sitting observing one customer, but looking for work model in textual design. It's about how do they do their jobs, and what you're really looking for is the things that happen in between software products. Outside of software products, workarounds in particular. It's like, why don't you do this in the software? Well, because it's, how do people really use the software? You do all these features, and then you discover what they really do is they press the download to Excel button.
Oh Lord, yeah.
And so
the amount of time I've seen this in UX research,
So how do you see, what are the sort of main ways in which you see jobs to be done as a method for driving innovation, discovering unmet needs, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think where jobs to be done shines is that it plays a huge role in helping us interpret the data we have, right, and making sense of how people make decisions. I think that's what the dream of every marketer is, just trying to get into the minds of the people it's trying to advertise to. What I think it does really well is that it shines a light on the discrepancies between what people say and what people do. because it analyzes the step-by-step process of getting that job done. It's similar to like the sequence model in contextual design. I'm not a specialist in contextual design, but reading into it feels like that kind of sequential analysis, and the looking at also the sub steps of each of those steps to get the job done. Feels like you're getting into a level of detail that allows you to almost disseminate like where does it hurt and how important is this particular thing to you. So it forces us as product marketers to take a step back from the way we usually frame the market and the way customers see us, and look at exactly what they're doing, what you were just saying, and how they actually make the decision. And it boils it down to the basics of it. Like, what are we here to do? What job are we getting done on their behalf? Because what happens a lot is we tell a story to ourselves about what our product does. And then, like you said, you run user testing and then you see people actually using it completely differently, or just it's just not the way you saw it happening. I think that's kind of the where Jobs to be Done adds a lot of value in driving that discontinuous innovation. It makes me think of the milkshake experiment, which you've for sure read through.
Talk about that.
The milkshake experiment, which I always kind of end up going to the same example. The story is of a fast food restaurant chain, essentially, that wanted to improve its milkshake sales. So the company basically segmented the market both by product, so the milkshake segment, and by demographics, like what would be a typical persona of a milkshake drinker. And what they did is they asked people who fitted that persona or that demographic to list the characteristics of an ideal milkshake. And the would-be kind of customers answered as honestly as they could, but they basically couldn't really improve the sales. However, by observing who went in that, just call it a restaurant or whatever, who went in to buy a milkshake for a period of an entire day, they noticed that in the morning there were a lot of people commuting to work, buying milkshakes, and then in the early afternoon, parents with children kind of coming in. And personas obviously it was a bit of a weird moment, because all of a sudden you have two very different segments coming in for the same product to get roughly the same job done, is to fill their tummy, to feel quite full. Someone was using it as a substitute for breakfast. The young parents with the kids were using it as a kind of early dinner, kind of in between snack. And that's something that, when you see it happening and when you see the actual process or the actual job to be done in motion, it kind of shows you things that you probably weren't thinking of.
And there was also the idea in that study of the milkshake being for the people who came in the morning. They were intrigued because they didn't understand, why were they coming in the morning to buy milkshakes. And when they sort of started, I don't know, perhaps not following them around, but probing them more deeply, it sort of turned out they were looking for something to do in their car as well, right? That was
interesting. Okay, right.
That was another thing they were trying to solve for. Is they had a long commute to work. They did want to eat something. But also, they sort of wanted something to do because they were driving American cars. This wouldn't be a problem in Europe because you've got a gear stick, so you know what to do with both hands. But in the US, you've got one hand free, and so they wanted something they could do with that hand, occupy themselves on the way to work. And then again, the competition is really different between the morning segment and the afternoon segment. In the morning, it's like, what am I going to do with my hands? And donuts kind of make my steering wheel sticky. And then, and then in the afternoon, it was the people coming in with kids, right? So it was like, what am I gonna,
need to keep them quiet.
What am I to occupy my kids? And the alternatives would be really different. So
really interesting one.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. Now, so it's very interesting. So Jobs to be Done can certainly be applied to innovation. But one of the things I would like to get your view on is, what sort of under what sort of company can apply jobs to be done as a method for innovation? Because now I'm looking at jobs to be done, then I'm thinking about, lean startup, small companies trying to move fast. And I'm wondering, is this a fit or not? When I think about big companies, like I worked in Microsoft, and they have a whole, the other question is not just which company can apply it, but what roles in a company should apply it. Because it's a kind of a research methodology, isn't it? It's not exactly product management. It's not really product marketing. Now, in Microsoft or mega companies, there's an answer to that question. Perhaps the company that you are doing work for in the Netherlands as well. If it's a huge company, they have like innovation departments or research departments, or people who have that job to be done in the company. And Microsoft has that. They have like UX, research, innovation people who are very good and who would do this stuff. They're the people who can sit down for 2 years and study this stuff, for a product. But
you can afford.
But a startup, I think about lean startup, someone who's early stage of funding. Would they have time? What do you think about this? What sort of company can usefully apply this?
Yeah, I think the beauty of jobs to be done, I think it's the flexibility. I mean, I know that there are practitioners that obviously go through the painful process of doing all those thousands of interviews and doing, and by all means, I think those are, they're entirely in their right to do it. And I think it's fantastic if you do have the resources. Even if you don't have the resources, I know of people who have used it in their startup to essentially, as something that was proved to be instrumental for them. In the early days when the core product was still being defined and the market sizing, they were still trying to figure out what to do. And it started as simply as doing a customer journey map and talking to people and asking them how do they go about solving a certain problem in the company that they were, the type of companies that they were thinking of serving. So they had an initial suspicion that, I think people cannot, e-commerce, for sake of example, e-commerce managers have trouble with this. Once they went to actually speak with them and going through, they started to see the patterns emerging, and they knew that that's an area that they wanted to further dig deep. Equally, I think what we've seen in the past few years is certain platforms enabling virtually any startup to do user testing for cheap or even for free in some aspects. And I think that's the beauty of using technology for that. So I think it's definitely doable for startups. What I would advise is understanding the approaches to jobs to be done. In what I've read so far, I know that there's at least 2 different approaches, if not more. But starting with a customer journey map, talking to people, creating maybe even a small customer advisory board seems to me like a fantastic start. Booking Zoom calls, share findings, iterate, ask people. I think it's something that every startup can do, and it doesn't have to be costly. Once you identified the struggle of getting a certain job done, you know that the customer is on the lookout for a solution, and they most likely will want to talk to you. So yeah, I think there is a lean way to apply this. And sometimes it's a founder and someone who's helping him with marketing, and that's fine. But doing a bit of the groundwork, or even, being part of a community like the PMM Hive, for example, fantastic way to go and ask questions and get some good input for sure.
Yeah, I think that's important. It makes me optimistic. You seem to believe there is a way to sort of simplify it down to applying, maybe in some cases, applying the principles more than the absolute details of the whole research.
Absolutely. Yeah. The outcome-driven innovation process, for example, can be a good backbone to that. And they tend to simplify it in like 6 steps. Kind of roughly defining what the job to be done is. Look at what the second step is, to look at the customer needs. The third one is to figure out which of the needs is more important and which one isn't really met at all, but is crucial. And then you kind of look at segments of opportunity and then start working on the marketing and the product strategy of how you might begin to solve that. But prototyping, rapid sprints, all of these things, I think they're rapid sprints. I think they can be quite easy to implement and get the job done. Yeah.
A couple of final questions and final thoughts on it. So, are there drawbacks with jobs to be done, and what would they be?
Yeah, definitely. There's always drawbacks with any single tool. It has its downsides as well. What jobs to be done? There's two things I would say. One of them is that it doesn't really give you yes or no answers. It doesn't really tell you, hey, your customer wants this feature but doesn't want that feature. It's not as simple as that. But it facilitates iteration rather and helps you identify opportunities of how you might address that specific struggle of your customer. It focuses on unearthing those needs. It doesn't spell out per se they're looking for this feature versus the other thing. And the other drawback, depending on how big your team is internal education. There are always going to be people who are not familiar with it. Sometimes that jobs to be done can be a bit of a head turner for a lot of people that are not familiar with it, or it might feel like it's too complex and it's going to be a huge, costly project. So getting the commitment can be a bit of a hurdle, but it's worth it. Even if it's like a couple of hours session, just talk about what it is and whether it's useful. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting.
Thank you so much. I love talking about jobs to be done. It's a very wide topic, and I feel like we're still uncovering the best way to apply this in companies and do it fast and efficient. So
thank you very much for helping us to dig into this interesting topic.
Thank you for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into This is Product Marketing, brought to you by Product Marketing Hive, a product marketing community that gives back. Check out our website, productmarketinghive.com, to join our community, meet fellow product marketers, and access free resources, including training, playbooks, templates, and events. If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe and give a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. See you next time.